Chapter 910, Monster Pathway. A few minutes later, Dolly Simone and Leonard Mitchell, who had repeatedly made errors in judgment, finally arrived at the top of the steep staircase. They proceeded down the steps at a very slow speed, cautious of their surroundings, and they were ready to enter combat at any moment. However, they failed to encounter any abnormalities even when they reached the bottom of the flight of stairs. They didn't even find any useful clues. Dolly grabbed onto the wind, cupped her hand to her ear, and listened carefully. A few seconds later, she looked around her and said, "There was a gunshot. A weapon once dropped around the street bend. That man named Enzo is dead." "Who did it?" Leonard asked in surprise. From his point of view, due to the repeated failures they had encountered, Enzo had easily escaped their pursuit. The possibility of a Rose School of Thought monitor silencing him and wiping away any clues was zero. If that were the case, who could have killed that Beyonder who was suspected to be a Sequence 5 or 6? It needed to be mentioned that the Red Gloves had used a sealed artifact to implement anti-divination before they carried out tonight's operation. It was unlikely for anyone to predict it ahead of time and wait there to hunt the escaping Enzo. Dolly shook her head. Those little guys didn't see anything. It's likely a Beyonder who's good at anti-divination. Perhaps it's Enzo's enemy, and they had been planning to act tonight. She simply offered a guess of hers, and the duo began independently searching the nearby streets to see if they could find any missed clues. Taking this opportunity, Leonard circled to a fence in a particular street. Suppressing his tone, he asked, "Old man, did you discover anything?" Inside him, Pallas Zoroast replied after 3 seconds. "You should have heard a tragic scream and had used that to correct the direction of your pursuit effort." It was let out by Enzo. He had apparently seen something extremely terrifying and indescribable, something that could directly cause damage and corruption to his soul body. Leonard was taken aback for a moment. He narrowed his eyes as he repeated softly, "Extremely terrifying and indescribable." Inside the inn, Klein teleported back with his new marionette. He then made his marionette stand to his side as he sat down. As he sized up his marionette, he sighed. "A Beyonder of the monster pathway, but he's still inferior to Senner. There's no way for him to hide in a gold coin for ease of transport. I can only let him follow beside me." From his Beyonder sequence, he isn't a core member of the Rose School of Thought, but his sequence isn't too low. Some importance must have been placed on him. That also means that if I don't disguise him, it's very easy for me to be targeted by the Rose School of Thought. On the contrary, I can probably use him as bait to fish for another wraith. When the time comes, he can walk alone while I hide 200 meters away to wait for the bait to be hooked. No, I can't. I mustn't let greed get to my head. The southern continent is where the Rose School of Thought is active. Once I expose my location, with how much importance the Mother Tree of Desire places on me, not only will a saint come, even an angel might appear. Yes, it's better if I disguise this marionette. As a faceless, I'm quite skilled at disguises. Then, I'll continue using mystical methods to find my next marionette. I'll wait for Danitz to finish his investigation and for Mr. Azek to come find me. Klein quickly made up his mind. Using a myriad of means, he gained an understanding of his new marionette's level and Beyonder powers. He was a Sequence 5 winner of the Fate pathway. In this pathway, a Sequence 9 monster was one who had super high spiritual perception. They often heard sounds others couldn't hear, and also see things others couldn't see. This allowed them to occasionally see the future and have an acute intuition for danger. Beyonders of this sequence often entered a state of enlightenment as they muttered indecipherable words. It was the reason why they were treated as real monsters. As for the corresponding Sequence 8 robot, the Beyonders would obtain terrifying calculation skills and precise control. The various parts of their bodies in those aspects would be clearly boosted, making them talented at close combat and shooting. At the same time, they also had the powers of divination and anti-divination. Sequence 7 was named Lucky 1 or Lucky. Beyonders of this level frequently encountered lucky events in their daily lives, like finding money on the street, having enemies miss shots aimed at them, getting dice rolls as they wished, and having women they liked to also like them back. However, their luck wasn't fixed and would fluctuate. At times, they were especially lucky, and at other times, they were no different from an ordinary person. Therefore, it wasn't something that could be relied upon, and one had to temper one's expectations. Sequence 6 was Calamity Priest. On the one hand, Beyonders could passively suffer all kinds of calamities, but they could foresee it and make preparations to eliminate or mitigate the effects. On the other hand, they would actively attract different kinds of calamities, affecting a target and enemy as a result. Then, using one's advantage of being lucky, avoid most of the danger and attack during the chaos. To put it simply, they could pull their opponents into a situation where they could take advantage of their strengths the best. Of course, many Calamity Priests could use the dangers of their own passive encounters to attack their enemies. Meanwhile, Calamity Priests could create psyche storms. Using their spirituality that surpassed that of other pathways, they could directly affect their opponent's soul bodies, causing them to feel dizzy and lost. If a Calamity Priest's enemy entered such a state, they were extremely prone to making errors. It caused the calamity to snowball and eventually devour them. And at Sequence 5 winner, Beyonders could control their luck to a certain extent. They could use their own temperance to accumulate large amounts of luck. At critical moments, they could dramatically reduce any dangers to their life multiple times. From time to time, they could also encounter beneficial situations that have extremely low probabilities in their daily lives. For example, due to someone's mistakes, they might receive an inheritance. The strange, comedic way they walked caused them to catch the fancy of a member of the opposite sex. Or their enemies who were pursuing them would foolishly get lost or make errors in judgment. At this level, Beyonders of the Fate pathway had a very keen sense of foresight. Be it divination or anti-divination, they were mysticism experts. In addition, they could also give their enemies bad luck to a certain extent, making their targets become unlucky. Beyonders of the Monster pathway are really extreme. Apart from the spirituality and fate domain, they almost have zero Beyonder powers. Even their constitution and calculation skills are provided at Robot. The subsequent advancements give rather limited improvements. This is my ideal model for a charlatan. They do not have any offensive or defensive abilities, simply relying on their premonition and how fate blesses them. I have to say that this is the most special path out of the 22 Beyonder pathways. I can find or guess their neighboring pathways. Only Monster seems rather asocial. It seems to be a lonely one. Perhaps the Beyonder pathway that focuses on fate is destined to be lonely. Klein silently reflected on the matter and had some ideas regarding the usage of his marionette. Of course, he still needed to carry out divinations above the gray fog. He needed to see if the passive good luck and calamities still existed after the Beyonder's actual death. If it really was present, Klein had to constantly face the trials of calamities. In comparison, Admiral of Blood Center is still better as a marionette. People only know how to cherish and regret once things are gone. Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating chortle. From the traits of the Monster pathway, he thought of a few effective means to deal with their mid- and low-sequence Beyonders. First, it was to catch them by surprise to let them see him directly. They would directly see the gray fog or other images, causing them to suffer a catharsis of the mind and receive damage to their bodies, pushing them to the brink of losing control. Second, it was to throw a special item out, causing them to face the test of seeing what shouldn't be seen and hear what shouldn't be heard. In this aspect, Klein had a blood crystal that came from a high-level devil that could produce such an effect, Blatherer's aura. Third, it was to entice them to give him bad luck and pretend to act unlucky so as to have an opportunity to strike back. Amidst his thoughts, Klein made the marionette empty his pockets, producing £35 10 solely 7 pence and a leather wallet. The wallet's surface and interior had a flower and name embroidered on it. It appeared to be completely handcrafted. Enzo, whether that's your name or not, your name is Enzo. Klein shot a glance at his marionette as he moved his gaze down to the golden ring with the inlaid emerald on his right hand. Via divination, he learned that the ring was named Green Essence. It had one effect: treat any ailments or injuries that weren't too serious. And it was precisely because of this that its negative effects were trivial. It only attracted mosquitoes. Thankfully, I'm not the one wearing it. Monster Pathway Beyonders don't seem to wear many mystical items. Even if they do, they will wear one or two rather low-level ones. This is a requirement of fate. Klein retracted his gaze in thought and looked at Enzo, who was staring at the wall. He had an urge grow within him. He wished to use his Monster Pathway marionette to look at himself. He wanted to know what was so special about him. Will this be very dangerous? I'll lose control as a result even if I'm seeing myself. No, back in Tingen City, a Demisol had also looked straight at me without being a Sequence 9. The only thing that happened was having his eyes bleed and be in a state of pain for a while. Although I have improved drastically from then, Winner Enzo didn't directly break down when he saw me just now. The reaction resembled my reaction when seeing Demoness of Despair Panatia's partial mythical creature form. To a divination above the gray fog? No, that involves the gray fog itself. The outcome will definitely be interfered with. Rely on my own divination powers in the real world. Klein took out a gold coin and let it run through his fingers. After a while, the gold coin bounced up and fell down into Klein's palm.